Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome to another inspiring and empowering episode of the Girls for Greatness podcast. I am your host, Delia Perry, and you are listening in to episode number 175 with my dear friend and just overall amazing human being, Rachel Weinstock. Now, some of you who may be regular listeners, you may be familiar with Rachel. She has been on my podcast 2 other times. She's a 2-time former guest. She first appeared on episode number 27, a podcast entitled Embracing the Power of Play. And then I had her come back and we did a real life, real talk episode where we talked about empowering the mental health of our children. That was episode number 120. So I highly recommend you go back and listen to those because she's just amazing. And now I have the honor of welcoming Rachel back a third time to talk all about her very soon to be released a book, which actually I think when this airs, it will have been released.
Yeah.
Her new book called Be Who You Needed, a book that is designed to be a guide for caring adults who want to help young people transform their emotional well-being, self-confidence, and happiness. Rachel is a teacher, a transformational coach, and speaker for youth who are struggling with being bullied, self-esteem, and anxiety. And she also holds a degree in visual arts and education. She was awarded the James W. Fair Leadership Award from the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. And Rachel's mission is to create a world where every child feels happy, confident, and safe. Rachel's approach to working with young people is deeply impactful because of her lived experience of being bullied as a child and teenager. Her new book represents the realization of her childhood dream to become the person she once needed. And I cannot wait to dive into so many of these amazing topics and just have this awesome, very important conversation. So, Rachel, welcome back to the Girls for Greatness podcast.
Thank you.
Yay.
Yay.
So, I kind of alluded to it, you guys. So, Rachel, you're in Ontario, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. In Ontario, been there for,
Like most of my life, but I
yeah.
traveled overseas. I lived overseas for 5 years. So I was in different countries, but most of my life I've been in Ontario. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I know on the other podcast, we had talked a little bit about kind of your story, your history.
Mhm.
Um, and I definitely want to dive into some of those things. But let me just ask you this. What, to begin with, led you into education?
Um, wow. I mean, it's such a great question. And immediately I got the flash of being 5 years old and making my entire basement I might have even shared this on some of the
Mm,
episodes that I did with you, but making it into a school. So I
mm.
think one of the things is I was a bit of a bossy child. I had a vision. I'm very creative. And so I had a younger sister and I would like play school with her. So I think one of the reasons is because I like to be a leader, and I
Mm,
have huge creative ideas. But also the biggest reason I think why I do this work, in terms of the classroom work I do, and also all the other work, is to create the world that I want to see. So I always feel like
mm.
when I go into a classroom, and I work as a substitute teacher, and I've been doing that for, I think it's like 14 years now. It's wild to think about.
Wow.
My experience is very different than I think what people imagine a supply teacher or a substitute teacher is like, because I create these bonds with kids that I'm working with, and they feel really loved and they want to be in my class. So my classrooms are kind of like these magical, I don't know a non-binary term, but queendom, kingdom, like
Mm,
just a beautiful magical land. So I always feel when I close the door that I'm creating the world that I want. So that's really, when I think about education, I think about how can we create the world that we want, beyond just the subject matter
mm.
being taught in school, really based in social emotional learning. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Mhm.
And I know that, your own story has obviously played a huge part in why you became an educator, why you have kind of made it your mission to really empower not just kids, but also those who care for them, those who are in a position of leadership, and how they can best, pour into them, I guess is a great way to say it, and empower them as well. So maybe just tell us a little bit about your own journey, because I know that is just a huge part of your book. It's a huge part of why you wrote the book, and just kind of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I feel like I'm going to start out by showing you the back of the book. And so the back of the book that's me. Well, I don't know.
Oh,
So visually, this will go, in terms of
yeah.
like with people seeing it. Okay, so people that can't see it right now, it's me with a little wizard hat from the 80s. My parents made it, had little like star stickers on. And I'm holding up, a magical wand. And that was really the first year that I was being bullied. So I started
Mm,
getting bullied in grade 1. So I was about 6
mm,
there, and it was very severe to the point where I didn't want to live anymore. And that kind of went on for most of my growing up years until the end of high school. So
mm.
there were a couple of years that I say that I had like a bit of a time off of that. But, anybody who's been through the abuse of bullying, which is, bullying is abuse, knows that even if you have time off, that's, the bullying continues in your own head.
Right.
So my story really, the huge part as well of why I do the work I do and why I'm just, dedicated to it with my whole being is because of what I went through of having
Mm,
so many unsafe spaces, and adults not doing what they should be doing, which is creating the safe spaces, whether they didn't know how to, or they were part of the problem, or they just let it go. Yeah.
right. Right. So for you, Rachel, so I mean, your experience, your, obviously that started at a young age and went all the way through your, high school career, but were there times that you um reached out to those who were in, your educators? I mean, they obviously had to see at some point, what was going on. They knew that probably something wasn't, you weren't feeling right, you weren't feeling comfortable, all of those things. Um, I'm curious, like, just like looking back, like, was it a situation where you reached out and just nothing was done, or was it that it was just ignored?
So,
Because I know
yeah,
you had supportive parents, correct?
yeah, I
Yes,
had
super
extremely,
supportive parents.
they're
Yeah.
actually in the book.
Oh,
So
yeah,
yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah, so I have super supportive parents, but they went through their own journeys growing up. And so when this was happening to me, they didn't know what to do. So they tried, and I watched them try, and it didn't work. So that was really hard to witness because, your parents, you imagine as a young child that they're there to protect you, and they were in every other area except this. And this was,
Mm,
a fundamental experience because I was so unprotected. So when I think about that experience and kind of what happened, it was like the image that I get in kind of a metaphor is like I was pushed into this gladiator ring without any protection. So
mm,
that's how it felt. My parents since have shifted a lot and learned a lot from me and my mom. She's now retired, but she was an educator, and I write about that too, about how she learned how to actually do bullying prevention because of the promise that
mm,
she made after I'd gone through all this to help other students. So my parents tried. We went to a couple of principals. So in elementary school, I still remember her name. I know who she is. We went to her, and as
mm,
a child, like children have such incredible, immense intelligence that I think they should be part of the hiring process for teachers and admin secretaries, everybody. There should be surveys in terms of their input as well, because all the people that children don't feel safe in, most of those people say, oh, that principal is terrible, that teacher is terrible, and they should have a voice too in this. So everybody knew that this principal was
mm,
not very kind and unhappy, whatever her journey was. And so when my parents went to her, and this was back in the like 80s, her
mm,
response was, boys will be boys. So I left that school. I never graduated in that class with my class. I did, and I talk about it in the book as well. When we went from grade 6 to grade 7, we were, it was downstairs. It was a small private school,
mm-hmm,
but we
mm-hmm,
went from the upstairs to the downstairs hallway. And so they said, oh, you're going to get an assigned and a counselor, but the counselor wasn't a social worker or anything. It was just a teacher that signed up to kind of like oversee a
mm,
couple of kids in grade 7. So I went in, and I was so excited to tell her all the things that have been happening, all the abuse, all the trauma, and just explain, like, I'm so unhappy, I'm crying. And I didn't have a lot of language for anxiety and all those things. But, when I went into her to speak to her and share with her, she, after I finished, said, oh, okay. So besides that, it sounds like you're doing okay. And so in that moment, I just knew like the adults are not going to help me. So yeah, I just felt like I needed to grow up and be who I needed, basically, to
mm-hmm,
help as many young people and then help adults in that too.
mm. How did you end up kind of, I guess, getting yourself through that? How did you cope and get yourself through? I mean, this was a long process,
Yeah.
and I know it's been a lot of
Yeah.
healing for you. It's been a
Yeah.
journey for you.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like for you, what that process looked like, how you managed.
Yeah. Um, I mean, there were a couple of things. So, one was I did a lot of art in university. So I
Mm,
studied art, but in high school, I got really, really good at it because that was one of
mm,
my lifelines. I cried a lot. I
mm.
cried myself to sleep a lot. I was really depressed. And I guess trigger warning, but there were a lot of things in terms of ways that I could harm myself to process and have
Sure,
some control over it. So one was, eating, kind of like disordered eating and just different things. Like
sure.
I was always trying to find people to help me. So I would literally make a friend at a party or whatever, and I'd start
Hmm.
telling them I'm going through this. So of course, I wanted so badly to have connection and protection, but what I was doing was breaking it and kind of pushing people away without knowing because I just didn't know how to do it. So a lot of it was just and then the biggest thing that kept me going was this vow to the universe of like I am
Mm,
going to grow up and do better for as many young people as I can. So that's really the biggest thing. And then the other piece was my family, because I
mm.
have a very, very loving family. A lot of the pain that I was experiencing would come out on them. And so I was not easy to live with. And I felt terrible for years since we've had a lot of healing in my family. But, it just kind of came out because that was my safe place at home. There are some young people that I see that don't have a safe place at home,
Right.
don't have a safe place outside of home. And that is just, they're on a track that's really, really dangerous in terms of their life. So I always try and protect those young people the most. But yeah, I think my loving family and just this vow to the universe and
Mm,
just knowing that this is not supposed to be happening the way it is. And just
right.
keep going. Yeah.
Right. And I know there was, if I'm correct, I think I remember reading something in the book
Mhm.
at one point about how you had written a piece in college, right? A play or a
Oh my
skit.
God. Yeah. Yeah.
Wasn't
And
it?
actually,
Wasn't it like
yeah.
an improv thing or something? Or it
Well,
was something.
I would not categorize it as, yeah, maybe an improvisation because improv immediately, I did study improv with like
Yeah.
comedy, but this was the most, and it took me weeks to recover from it. Yeah. So my professors actually that are in the book, hopefully are coming to the in-person launch in
It's
April.
awesome.
And they're in the book. I don't think that they know that yet, without their names, but they know who they are. So we had been in this cohort with 72 people, and we did a lot on social justice and anti-racism and just
Hmm.
like beautiful
Hmm.
things that are so
Hmm.
important. But the one thing that I felt like we didn't have a lot of training on was bullying. And so I was horrified when I realized this, because it was almost at the end of the year. So our profs had told us that we were going to have a talent show in which probably 71 people interpreted as it proved with what they brought, a poem, a dance, a song, a
Right.
comedy, something like that. I am a perfectionist and an artist. And so I decided that I would take journals from when I was going through the abuse I went through in high school and pull pieces of that. And then I asked the boys, we had a small amount of boys or men in our cohort, and asked them to represent the people that did this to me growing up, specifically on the
Mm,
bus when I was bullied. And then they just hurled those horrible, toxic, abusive things at me. And I just stood in front of them and let that land on me and bawled and shook in front of the whole class. So that was the performance piece. People didn't know what hit them after. And so there
yeah.
was all of us were silent. And then it was a really beautiful moment of this big room where everybody just kind of gathered silently towards the front of the room. We all sat in a circle and people started disclosing, my sister died, I was bullied, I was abused, all different kinds of things related to bullying and not. And that was a really profound moment because I realized, the
Mm,
more that I shared in terms of my truth and my vulnerability, it gave people permission slips. And so, yeah. And
mm.
then from there, I won the leadership award. I was nominated for that. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. No, I love that part. And I think that set just has such a great representation of what, like you said, happens when we're willing to
Yeah.
address things, when we're willing to share, who we really are and the things that have been really difficult for us. It really opens a door of having that vulnerability. which is
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah.
Um, so your book, tell us maybe a little about, I mean, I understand that the whole concept of be who you needed. I get that. That's awesome. And I'm just curious, like who maybe you wrote it for, and what kind of maybe you're trying to accomplish. What message do you really want those who read it to understand?
So I am totally neurodivergent. So I'm not like the concise person in case
Right.
your
No, that's
listeners,
okay.
but I will just say from, what I feel. And that was a hard question that I kept getting over and over when I was writing the book. This work is really, I feel like I'm a bridge between the children and like youth and teens and preteens into adults. And so I always feel like I'm being that bridge. And so for this book, I wrote it for caring adults, caring people and educators, aunts, uncles, anybody who really is a human, to be honest,
Yeah.
people with an inner child like we all have. And so it's for those people to, through story and through other contributors, which are friends of mine that are woven throughout the book with different various backgrounds, to think about with planting seeds of like, how am I doing this with young people? Like, in terms of how am I
Mm,
speaking to them? Am I taking enough accountability? How can I do this better? How can I listen to them more? How can I empower them? So it's all through storytelling. I have
mm,
specific things that I say in terms of tools and, being on eye level when you're speaking to a young person,
mm.
if you're taller than them, and especially like quite young children.
Right.
So there's specific things that I offer, but most of this is just really through storytelling. I want people to reflect on how they're showing up with the young people in their lives and how they can do it with more presence and open heart and accountability and empowerment for both them and the young people in their lives.
Sure. Sure. No, that's awesome. What have been some of the things that I guess you've noticed through your career as a teacher, as a, as an educator, as a speaker,
Mhm.
things that you've noticed, maybe even differences in, let's just say, the last, 3 to 5 years in terms of kids, how they're coping, how they're, a kid who's bullied, today versus a kid who was bullied, have things totally changed? Is it shifted? Is it a much more um, severe? I mean, I know every case is different, but
Yeah.
I'm just curious your outlook.
Yeah. So again, trigger warning. It is, I always have this feeling, and I've had this feeling since I was being bullied in high school, really, is we as adults really have blood on our hands. And when I say that, I don't mean just the children that are murdered or kill themselves. I mean all the trauma and the pain and the abuse that people go through by being put through this abuse and not protected. It is complex trauma. Like, bullying is consistent, like repetitive things that break a person's spirit. And if you think about kind of how you grow into your identity,
Mhm.
all of it, everything becomes kind of interrupted. So, I don't know what I would be like without these years of
Mm,
trauma that I went through, but I do know that that's how I see it. So I remember right before Columbine happened, I remember thinking, oh, like this could be so severe that if somebody doesn't have a good home and somebody is just pushed to the max, like this could get really, really bad. And that's
mm,
what we're seeing over and over and over. And I know it's different in terms of our countries and our laws, but we're seeing it now as well, like to some degree here as well. And we just need to do better. Like we need to believe people when they're being saying, like, there has to be accountability with the schools. Of someone comes forward and says I'm being bullied, like there needs
right.
to be social workers that actually the kids trust. And there are some wonderful ones out there, but oftentimes I hear from young people too, I don't want to go to that person, I don't trust them, they're not doing anything. And it's not just them, it's also principals that, young people have told me that. And that's in my coaching work as well as in
Mhm.
my work
Mhm.
as a substitute teacher. So there needs to be more organizing around this and care. In my book, there's a story about Parker, and Parker is he came to me. The way we connected, we've never actually met in person. We're going to meet in person for the first time at the
Mm.
person launch. But he came to me, came on my radar basically because his mom had posted with his permission on a Facebook group saying, this is Parker on the first day, I think it was grade 6, and then after. And so there's a picture of him smiling, and the next picture is him crawled up in fetal position on the couch saying he doesn't want to live. And so Parker was the only person of color in his area, in his school, and he was dealing with racism and bullying for years. And then by the time he got to me, he didn't want to live anymore. And they had gone to the school over and over and over, and then been told, I mean, literally they had been told, like, move out of the area, go to somewhere more diverse. And so yeah, I helped support him. He was part of my preteen program. I coached him, and it transformed his life. He had so much support from Toronto Blue Jays. Like, there are just so many people through that post. And now he's doing support in terms of leadership in his high school, and he's part of the book. So yeah, you can do things. That's the thing, is parents feel like it's hopeless because you get like, no, 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 it's not that bad, we're taking care of it, and nothing's happening, and your child's breaking down. So
Right.
I would say you have to keep going if you get a no. And sometimes it means like posting on social media or going higher up to a superintendent. Like, you have to believe them, because it literally can be a life situation, life or death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, I really like what you said earlier about, just doing better.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things that came across my mind when I was thinking about this episode was, um, I always say to my kids, I always have said that, the kids who are acting up, the kids who are getting in trouble, or the kids who, whatever, seem to be this, person being called out. So they're not doing that for just no reason at all. You have to understand, like, that's not something that any kid sets out, I believe, to do, is to, get in trouble, to, be a disciplinary, issue, whatever you want to say. There's reasons. And, everybody's situation at home is different. You have to be thoughtful. You have to be mindful. You have to be respectful of all of that. But I also think that there is this huge problem, I feel like, in some ways, with education, in terms of expectations between, I think this should all be on the teachers, or I think it should all be on the parents. You know what I mean? I think there's a divide there that I sometimes feel like we need to really work to be better, to do better. I mean, from the kids who are, being bullied to the kids who are bullying, I mean, the same thing applies. I mean, there's reasons for that as well. And something's not being taught. Those kids are not getting what they need either, in some ways.
Yeah. And like, I talk about that in the book, because one of the main people that was bullying me in high school, actually starting in grade 8, and then went into high school a bit, and then we actually became friends later on. But he is in the book with his permission, and with a pseudonym.
Right.
And he talked about, we had a huge talk on Zoom for hours, actually talking about it finally, and going through everything that happened. And he disclosed to me how traumatized all the boys were that were doing this to me. So, and what had happened before I'd come to that school, because I left my private school to go to a public school in order to, and it was the 90s. So I imagine Technicolor green grass, right, and just like, I used to read 17 magazine, and I imagine that's what it would be like for me. And it was not like that at all. But he talked about why those people were doing that, and why he was doing that. And so, and I know that as a teacher, I know that as a coach, I see it all the time. And so I'm really able to reach the people that are causing this abuse, because they're, going through their own trauma. So I agree with you completely. And I think that it's easy to say, oh, it's the parents' fault, it's the educator's fault. It's actually an us problem. So it's like a collective society problem. And everybody, needs to be on board. And that's why I wrote this book, is to have people thinking about, okay, like, you're an aunt, okay, you're, an uncle, you're a cousin, you're a parent, you're, a person, the bus driver spent 5 years listening to the abuse that was hurled at me. I don't remember who they were, but I know that they heard it.
Right.
So every person needs to step up.
That's so true. That's so true.
Yeah.
What are, maybe, let's just say, 3 things that you can think of off the top of your head that would be things that you would want anybody in any of those positions to do?
Mm-hmm.
What are maybe, let's just say, 3 things that you can think of off the top of your head that would be things that you would want anybody in any of those positions to do? to
Mm-hmm.
be mindful of, to keep in mind, to really focus on in terms of how they can make the most impact on the youth around them?
Okay, the first thing would be believe them.
Mm,
Just believe people when they come forward.
mm,
That's the first thing. The second thing is find help. So if you don't know how to help them, it's your job to find other people that can and
mm-hmm,
keep going to connect them to somebody. And then the third thing I would say is, and this is actually the most empowering thing that I've created and just found in terms of my work as a coach and a teacher, bullying prevention activist, speaker, is role playing. So
mm,
I actually got a message 2 days ago saying from a family that, had reached out to me,
mm,
just friends with their children. And I had told them, I didn't even remember this because people always reach out to me for different things. And I had said, go through a role play and, figure out, because oftentimes, and instead of saying kind of like, okay, you do this and I'll do this, ask the child what happened specifically, at school, whether they're a teen or, in
right.
kindergarten, whatever. And so, they'll go through, and I say to, when I'm coaching people on this, give me the tone exactly. Cause they'll say, well, Tommy hurt my feelings. I'm like, great. Tell me, not great that he hurt your feelings, but what happened? What did he say to you? Well, he said that I was stupid. Show me. I want you to pretend that you're Tommy and say it to me and I'll be you. Well, you're stupid. You're so dumb and you know nothing. And then you literally can see, you kind of pull out the threads of what actually needs to
Mm,
happen. And the medicine of what to do is usually inside of that. So oftentimes the adults can just hold space for that and play around with that.
mm,
And then you find a way to activate, speaking up. And usually that takes, like, if I'll, let's
mm,
say, for example, this situation with Tommy, and I'm coaching the child on this, it will take 3 to 4 times role playing in order for them to feel empowered, because you can then see, well, stop it. I don't want to have you say that to me. And it's like, well, I wouldn't believe you then because you're not solid in your tone. You're not looking at me. Like, there's a lot of things
mm-hmm.
that you can actually,
Yeah,
through role playing, find the solution.
sure. No, those are great. Those are great, Rachel. I love those. Um, Before I kind of wrap up, I'm curious for you, what are some of the things that you've maybe discovered about yourself through writing this book? What were maybe some of the challenges? What were
Hmm.
some of the things that you were like, wow, like I didn't realize this was going to be this difficult. And yet I, came out the other side and here I have this beautiful book to share with the world.
Well, I can tell you that this is almost a 10-year process. So if someone would have told me, and by the way, my team was like, oh, once you launch the book, that's just the beginning of the work. And I was like, I can't. I actually told them, you're gonna have to carry me on like one of the Egyptian thrones from ancient
Right.
times, like to
Right.
the finish line, because I can't do it anymore. Well, I've learned, I mean, because I have a learning disability. So for me to write and be concise is
Mm,
very challenging. So I have enough to write probably 2 to 3 other books. We had to edit a lot. I think I'm at 200 and let's see. Yeah, it was like just under 300 pages for this. So that was one thing, is getting kind of through stuff in terms of how much is in my head out into the paper. I have felt this eternal kind of like agony over the fact that I want my book to be, because I'm always learning new strategies. So I want my book to literally be something that you open and then an in real time hologram pops up and still like me and says like things that I've learned, but that's impossible because it's already print. So so I learned that, and I keep telling myself, okay, I have a TikTok, I have an Instagram, I have Facebook, like I can still do stuff in real time there. I also learned that my book designer, I had hired somebody else who was kind of a friend of mine from online
hmm
social media, but they were a designer and they weren't specifically a book designer. And Ida, and I can send you the information below to you later, designed this book. And it's that people have been talking
Mm,
about it. This is the proof. It's the very first book I have, but without that gray line.
right.
It's gorgeous, and it was, inspired by Untamed by Glennon Doyle. Shout
Mm.
out to my future bestie. And people have already said, wow, the cover is beautiful, because I wanted it to feel friendly and open. So with Ida, who's specifically a book designer, I learned, oh, like I just kept investing. I could have done this like very differently in terms of what I invested into this, but I really wanted it to be something beautiful and really put effort and love into each part. And I learned, like, most adult books, they don't have pictures in the middle, but I
Mm,
loved, like, I feel like it's a
yes.
little break of, like, there's like hand drawn images that my designer did, and just like it's very friendly, so you
Yes.
kind of get through it. um yeah, and I just learned also, when something isn't working with somebody, to just graciously and kindly say, okay, this is not working, and honor their time, and pay them for their time, and move on to find somebody else. So now I've learned
Mm,
who I really want on my team for my potential next book. People keep
sure.
saying that. And that I can do something. It's taken, about a decade, but I can do
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. It's awesome. Such an awesome accomplishment.
Thank you.
So awesome. Um, so my last two questions, I'm not going to ask some of the ones that I asked you before, but this is one that I'm actually using this
Sure.
season is, tell me something that you are currently working to improve on in your own life.
Oh, there's always so many things. The thing that pops to my mind right now, so I have the most incredible partner, and they unfortunately are in the other room with COVID. And so
Oh
yeah, so
no.
we've been kind of stuck, and both of us have never had COVID. It's like 3 years into the pandemic or whatever. So they just got it. And so far I'm okay. But we were kind of, because we've been doing so much for the book launch, and I not in a real, like, kind of slight snippy, like, they were calling to me and I couldn't hear
Mhm,
them, and I was like,
mhm.
what? And I also have tinnitus, so I was like, have ringing in my ears, then they're calling to me and I couldn't hear, and then the laundry machine was going, and so I was just kind of like slightly frustrated. I was like, what? And then after I came out of the room, they said, and we've talked about this a lot in our relationship, that it's very, very important to them that we're always kind to each other and patient. And so, and they were like, look, in the scale of things, we are so kind and so loving to each other. But because they had a lot of their own stuff
Mhm,
growing up
mhm.
and what they experienced,
Sure.
even just the slightest bit of like frustration. And so yeah, I'm working on having that pause in between
Mm,
getting frustrated, and I have built up a really good, ability, and in terms of how I work with young people. But when it's the people that you live with, or the people that are closest to you, and it's not in the professional role, it's easy to kind of slip in those
yep.
moments.
Yep.
And so I think that there's kind of this renewed commitment to being present and accountable of my energy, which most of the time I am. But
Mm,
yeah, I think that's a more presence
yeah.
practice that I'm
No,
working.
I love that. That's a great reminder. Great
Yeah.
reminder. And my last question, tell me one thing that you are proud of yourself currently for being or doing.
Hello.
I was like, that's gonna be an easy
Yes.
question.
Yeah,
Like,
the book is, I'm like super proud. And also, it's been, I was just talking to Rain, my partner, about it last night, that like, as we're doing this campaign and launching,
mhm,
the amount, because I've been posting things for years on social media and doing
mhm.
interviews and all these things, and just kind of chipping away at just this passion for making the world better
Right.
for young people, and helping to support the adults that are in their lives as well at the same time. And so I'm getting to really kind of like see the seeds that I planted over the years of actually how much support I have. Like, I actually didn't know.
Mm,
Someone posted, they've never written anything to me, and they posted on one of my book videos, your content for years has been impacting my life, and I just want you to know that.
mm.
Another person said they show my content to their students all the time, and I
That's
had,
awesome.
yeah, so I'm really getting kind of yeah, beautiful like feedback of the seeds that I planted over the years.
That's so great. That's so great. I'm not surprised. And I am so excited to see where this takes you and what's next. And I love everything that you're doing and what you're about. It's so, so needed and such important work. Something that I think all of us, as human beings, like you said, need to be reminded of, even if we're not, maybe in direct contact with someone who's young or someone in the youth. I feel like the message across the board about being kind, about listening, about believing. I mean, I think that's just so important as human beings.
Yeah.
So it's awesome, Rachel. I'm so, so happy
Oh,
for you.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
So
Yeah.
awesome. And thank you so much for taking the time to come on again.
Pleasure. Pleasure. Thank you, everybody. And BeWhoYouNeededBook.com is the website. So if you want to check
Awesome.
that out, it will be there. Okay.
Wonderful.
Thank
And
you so
everything will be linked
much.
as well. Yes.